Good day, listeners. You've tuned in to More Than a Funeral, Voices of the Red River Valley, powered by Corsmo Funeral and Cremation Service right here in Moorhead, Minnesota. My name is Tom, and I'm going to be your host today. And whether you are listening on your computer, maybe your phone, car, any other kind of device, and possibly even your tractor or combine, we welcome you here to today's episode. We all know there are so many funeral-related podcasts of interest dealing with so many various issues, but our focus is going to be on the personal aspect of relationships and the multitude of interesting people and organizations that like to call the Red River Valley their home. And on occasion, we might push the edge a little bit, discuss some of those controversial issues. We all know what we're talking about. Red Jell-O. Is it appropriate to serve at church potlucks anymore, or is it a taboo subject? And there's so many other things such as hot dish, casserole. What's the difference between the two anyway? So, we invite you to sit back for a few minutes, grab yourself a blistering hot cup of Lutheran Church coffee, and enjoy the conversation. We are glad you stopped by to listen. Well, good day, listeners. You have tuned into More Than a Funeral, Voices of the Red River Valley. My name's Tom Pence, your host today, and it is episode number 6. And I am sitting here today with Petra Gunderson-Leith. Is it pronounced Leith? Is that correct?
It is.
Petra Gunderson-Leith. I met her some time ago, but she is currently the archivist. She's one of the Historical and Cultural Society of Clay County, right here in Moorhead, Minnesota. And so she's been kind enough to come in and talk a little bit about the history of the Clay County, and more specifically maybe Moorhead and the surrounding area. But also, I think we've got some good information about the area cemeteries, which to me, of course, in funeral service is kind of interesting. More specifically, Prairie Home Cemetery and how it kind of expanded from there. So, Petra, thank you for being our guest today, kind of putting you on the spot.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, just tell us a little bit about you personally, not too much, but just what you want to talk about, a little bit about your background, and how you came to join the Historical and Cultural Society of Clay County. That's a long one. How you came to join them, and now what you do as an archivist, and then we'll kind of just roll into talking a little bit about the people coming to our area.
Yeah, so I actually grew up in Moorhead. I've lived here my whole life, not far away from Corsmo, so I'm very familiar with the area. I was always in love with history, have been since I was very young, and as I was going into college, I was starting to think about what I wanted to do. Museums seemed like a natural fit, a good way to apply that love of history. So I started working at HCSCC as an undergraduate over at MSUM, anthropology department. And then from there, I just kind of got involved in the archives, working with Mark some and getting a little bit of experience and realizing that's where I really wanted to be. Of course, Mark wasn't thinking about retirement at that point.
Right.
So I never thought I would be in that job, but it's kind of a dream job.
Yeah.
And
a good dream.
Yeah.
I've had some bad dreams.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so I did kind of work there for a while, left for a while, went other places, and then came back as a graduate student at NDSU, worked in collections with 3D artifacts. Telephones, your wedding dresses, funeral candy from the 1800s.
So 3D artifacts, is that what you...
Yeah.
That's their official term? I'll call it stuff.
Stuff, yep. Things you collect. And I enjoyed that a lot, but I wanted to get back in the archives, and so that's what I did. And then Mark retired, and I snuck on in. So
do you like going to flea markets and estate sales, things like that?
Oh, yeah. Yep.
I can imagine that. Oh, my goodness. All right. So you're now the archivist, and I was over at the center about a month or so ago to visit with you initially. You're downstairs in the basement, as I'll call it too. But when I walked in there, I mean, it's a relatively new building, but I was just blown away by the books, obviously, and the archives, what a coincidence, and just stacks of things around there.
Oh, yeah.
But it must be organized.
It is, yes. Yep. So you were in our reading room, which is where all of our public resources are. So things people can just pull off the shelves. Anyone who stops in can read those books.
Kind of like a library.
Like a library, exactly.
It is a library.
Yeah, yep. And then we have the stuff that's not hidden, but it's behind a door, and it's things that I pull out for people when they're researching, or I use all the time in my research.
One thing that really amazed me, and I digress a bit, was there was the stack of the Polk directories.
Yes.
And my mom, many years ago, worked for Polk Directory. We're talking a long time ago. And my wife even worked for them briefly, quite a few years ago, gathering information. And I thought they were long gone. But you still use them, apparently. And for those younger listeners that don't know what a Polk directory is, it's pre-internet, pre-Google, safe to say, when people were willing to divulge information.
Yes, yes. Very interesting information that helps a lot in research.
And you still use it?
Oh, yeah. Yep.
Wow.
And they're still published. They put them out every year. We get just about every 5 years we get one. And they're wonderful to track the population of the area.
Yeah. We used them here a lot before Google and the internet came about too. So I won't tell you. I won't share with you any of my wife's stories when she was going door to door.
I would love to hear those.
Let's say people change. So, but let's talk a little bit about the Clay County area, Moorhead, and the surrounding area, the migration of people coming here. And since I don't really have a lot of specific questions, I'll try to interject some genuine questions as they come up. But let me just turn things over to you, and you tell me what you think we should know.
All right. Well, Clay County history goes back a long ways. It was the kind of shared land of the Dakota and Ojibwe prior to white settlement in the area. And that's a long history. And then by the 1850s, the Hudson's Bay Company was starting to look at fur trading in the area because they wanted beaver pelts, which made some lovely hats back in the 1800s and were very popular over in Europe. And so they settled a post or a warehouse at Georgetown, right on the Red River. Not where Georgetown is today. So Georgetown is now right on Highway 75, going north. That's there because of the railroad. But it was right on the river before for easy transport. And that was in 1859 that they settled that.
When I was out there for the sesquicentennial, and I had to look that up, I went down to the Black Powder Chute. Was that kind of where the original Georgetown was? Close?
Close. So that is the reconstructed warehouse. They reconstructed it in the 1970s as a part of the, that would be the centennial of Clay County settlement, 1872 to 1970-72. But the original spot was sort of it's the Gilbury Farm, and that's just off the road. There's a bridge over the Red River. It's just off the road from that. Yeah.
Does anything still exist out there? Some footings or?
There's little bits here and there, but there's not a lot. Some archaeological stuff has been discovered. We have some of it. Bullet casings, coins, things like that.
I would imagine floods every other year or so has pretty much wiped it out. So.
Clear it up pretty fast.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. Well, I interrupted you. Sorry.
No, that's just fine.
Please continue.
Yeah. And so once they started getting the warehouse going, that started to bring in more settlers. In the 1860s, Randolph Propsfield came. Well, he came 1859, but really started to bring other people by the 1860s. The U.S.-Dakota War happened in 1862, which actually cleared out most of the settlers that were here.
I read that, yeah.
Yep. So they fled, and then Randolph Propsfield stayed, and others came back, but not many. So he was kind of the stalwart settler in the area. And then another German settler, Adam Stein, also came in the early 1860s, still in that Georgetown area. Then Propesfield eventually settled closer to Moorhead in what is now Oakport. And that's where everyone sort of thought Moorhead was going to be.
Okay.
So when the railroad came in the 1870s, they were starting to sort of think about where they were going to cross the Red River. And that was going to be where the big town was going to grow up. They had already platted out Glendon, Hawley, things like that. They thought it would be where Propesfield Farm was. And so that's where a town started to grow up. Then the railroad kind of pulled one out on all of those people and bought land from a man named Job Smith.
Okay.
And he was in what is now Moorhead. And that's where we grew up. Where Propesfield was is kind of called Bogusville now.
Bogusville?
Yep.
Okay.
And so the population just skyrocketed after that. So in the 1870 census, I think there are around 90 people living in Moorhead.
90?
90.
Okay.
90. And then by 1874, there were over 2,000 people.
So a lot of these people coming here wasn't really agriculture, was it?
Not around Moorhead, but there were some that came. So like the Buffalo River area, there was a group of Norwegians that settled. The Thortvit family was one of those big families, and they were here for agriculture. So there were certainly agriculture. And Propesfield too. He did agriculture, experimental farming. Yeah.
I noticed when you talked about what's it called, the U.S. Dakota War?
Yep.
Yeah. I read a little bit about that and how only 2 families returned back to Georgetown at that time.
Yeah.
Propesfield and Hutchinson?
Hutchinson.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, and they...
People were just afraid of an uprising, primarily. Is that right?
Yeah. There was fear. It never reached this point, the war.
Read that.
It was mostly down in southern Minnesota, but there was still that fear.
Oh, yeah.
And in the 1860s, when Hudson's Bay was operating, a majority of the residents of Clay County were Métis and Ojibwe. So Métis is French and Indigenous couple having a child, and they're and so there were relationships and connections. So it is still interesting that everyone left and didn't come back. But everyone was kind of moving around during that time, too, figuring out where they wanted to settle.
Right.
So, yeah. And then Moorhead kind of grew from there. Talking about Prairie Home Cemetery, it's interesting that it took until 1874, 75 for them to start thinking about where to bury people in an organized way.
What did they do with them before that?
I don't want to say they were buried in the front lawn, but
the backyard.
The backyard,
yeah.
Still in rural areas during that, even after Prairie Home Cemetery, for example, people were still buried on the farm.
Yeah.
Or sites that were unmarked.
Right.
They're all over the county.
I was just going to say that there's probably not uncommon. Well, it's uncommon, but it's not uncommon if there were an excavation of something going on to find. There's 2 graves here.
Yep.
And there used to be a farm here, et cetera. So, it got unmarked, and that's just what they did.
Yeah. But
going back to Prairie Home then, sorry.
Yeah, they decided that they did, in fact, need somewhere to bury people. The man who really spearheaded the settlement and starting of Prairie Home was a Presbyterian minister who had come from out east as a missionary to the area. And his brother also came. He lived down in southern Minnesota, but he was visiting up here. He drowned in the Cheyenne River, and he ended up just being buried in a temporary grave. I think they couldn't send him back east at the time, and so they just buried him. But his brother wanted somewhere for him to be permanently and have a marker.
I read that he was kind of temporarily buried between a couple of trees that was marked. Just like you said, just because of the situation, they were unable to return him. So that's where he was until Prairie Home came to be.
Yep, and he actually wasn't buried until 1876 in Prairie Home. So they started it in 1875. Okay. So Elmer was the minister, and he joined with Solomon Comstock, who was a lawyer and attorney for Clay County, and then a couple other gentlemen, and I'm going to mix up their names if I don't check my notes. So it was William White, Judge, later became Judge Sharp.
Sure. I was in the Sharp School.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. So all notable residents.
Yeah.
Except White actually left eventually. And he was a lumberman. So it was all men of industry who were instrumental in the founding of Moorhead in early days.
And just recognizing, as you said a few moments ago, they needed an organized place to put people.
Yeah. Yep. And
back in the 18, when was it founded again, Prairie Home?
75.
Okay.
Yeah.
It was outside of town.
Yeah.
So,
Yep. It was
crazy.
There was no Concordia College at that point, which is right across the street. There
No Dairy Queen.
No Dairy Queen, most certainly.
Oh, no.
Yeah. And so they bought 5 acres, would be the cemetery plot. They bought it for $1 from the railroad who owned it at the time, which is pretty cheap when you think about it. Even then,
Not a
bad price. And they started burying people shortly after purchasing it. The first person buried there was a typhoid victim, a younger man. And then I think Elmer's brother was maybe the third person to be buried there, something like that. So it was a little slow starting. You can't. That's a good thing. Yeah. But of course, there were. It steadily increased, and more people. The plot sold out pretty fast.
The plot was thickening.
Yep.
As they say. I noticed that as I was doing a little bit of research, surprisingly, they didn't hire a caretaker until 1902.
Yeah.
So up until that point, which was only maybe like 20 years, they relied on the families to maintain. Mm-hmm. I mean, it wasn't as we know cemeteries now, it wasn't a nice lush lawn, manicured, probably prairie grass, and pretty rough. I can only try to imagine that. So, but fascinating.
Yeah. And there were alleyways through it. So spots where there couldn't be burials, and they did eventually close those up so that they could have more spots there. Okay. Yeah. But as they started to fill up, they did eventually need more room, and they started Riverside Cemetery
in North Moorhead.
Yeah.
I guess if you want to tell a little bit about Riverside or why that began, but I do want to come back to Prairie Home a little bit.
Oh, yeah.
When I moved here in 1993, I think it was right about that time they were starting to take it back. I mean, they cleared out a lot of brush and they cleaned it up, I'll just put it that way.
Yeah.
I think it was 93. And they were able then to open up a lot more grave spaces. Mm-hmm. Because to the south side of the cemetery, it's kind of a low-lying area there, and probably gets some water in there, and there's a kind of a turnaround there too. But from what I understand before I came, it was kind of marginal until the board or somebody finally just said, we need to do something with it. And I know the caretakers back then too probably put in a lot of time, but let's go back to Riverside in North Moorhead, up by the beet plant, as we say.
Yeah,
can't miss that. But that came about as a result of Prairie Home not filling, but a lot of the spaces being purchased.
Yep. So all of the spaces were purchased by the early 1880s. So no more than 5-6 years after the Cemetery Association started. And so they purchased land along the river north of town. Again, would have been not in the middle of a residential area like it sort of is now. It's on the edge of town still, but they had to pay a little more for that one. It was more than $1. I don't remember the exact amount. But Inflation, yep.
$2.
And so then you started to see a lot of people buying plots out there. And that also has a lot of significant early folks that are buried there as well. Not to be confused with the St. Joseph Cemetery, which is right across the street, basically.
Right. Yep.
Growing up, I always thought they were the same cemetery, and then I realized they were two separate ones.
Right.
But
and back then, there was a pretty clear distinction between Catholic cemeteries, Protestant cemeteries, and there still is to some extent. But one thing I did kind of find fascinating about, again, I kind of come back to Prairie Home, but it's probably the same at Riverside also, that there are sort of sections of the cemetery that are more Norwegian and more Swedish, things like that.
Yeah.
And you can kind of tell by, of course, around here you got Anderson Swenson's Who Knows. But,
yeah. But even looking in the record books where they're documenting the burials as they're occurring, sometimes they'll note if someone is Swedish, it'll say Swede in parentheses. So that does kind of lead me to think that there was maybe more Norwegians early on. There was a Swedish cemetery out, would have been kind of south of town, I think. It's now Evergreen.
Oh, sure.
So that was started by Bethesda, which was a Swedish church. So that would have been where most of the Swedes were probably buried. And then obviously there were in Prairie Home as well, but there were always those distinctions.
As we used to say, even a little bit of segregation, even in burials. Yes. So, to some extent. So, anything else, I guess, about Prairie Home? I know as the town grew and Concordia was established and was Comstock. What was this for? Solomon?
Solomon.
Was he kind of instrumental in Concordia, or was that somebody else?
He was not
ignorant there. So
he was actually more closely tied to the MSUM.
Oh, sure. Moorhead State. Yep.
Normal school at the time.
Right. I love
he's
that
got
name.
Comstock Memorial Union. Over there.
Okay.
And then, well, the Comstock Theater at Concordia is actually named for would be his son's wife. So they're got their feet dipped in both, I think. You can't find much in Moorhead history that Comstock didn't have some fingers in.
Well, I personally, I mean, just because I'm in this profession, I find it fascinating to walk around some of the cemeteries and just look at the dates. You've thrown out some dates here, when the town was founded for the most part, when the cemetery was founded. But people buried there, of course, were born much earlier than that. So are there any Civil War veterans buried in the area, do you know? Putting you on the spot there. Most of them are probably down around Illinois, Fort Snelling, things like that. But there probably are, but there's not a real section reserved for them.
We certainly do. Luther Osborne was someone who fought in the Civil War, and I believe he's buried in Clay County.
Okay.
I'd have to double check.
Sure.
He lived closer to Glendon, but there was always crossover with Moorhead and rural areas. And then Adam Stein was actually a Civil War veteran as well. So he was one of those early settlers, German immigrant who came just before the Civil War and fought the Confederacy and then came and settled here. He's not buried in Moorhead. He'd be buried out. I'm not exactly sure where he is, but so there certainly are.
He's out there somewhere.
Yep.
All right. Yeah. Well, before we talk a bit about more of the history of Moorhead, sorry, Fargo, but history of Moorhead, I know there's some, I don't want to call them shady, but obviously I've read, many people have read, and it's part of history, that it had its fair share of saloons and rough customers, and I was fascinated by Moorhead's first female police matron. Is that correct?
Yep,
yeah.
Anna Gates.
She looked like you wouldn't want to mess with her.
Yeah, she was tough.
If her family's listening to this, I apologize. But no, I mean that in a good way.
She was an amazing woman. She fought for the women's right to vote.
Suffragist, yeah.
Yep. Not the only suffragist buried at Prairie Home. There's a few of them. But yeah, she was worked with the women and children, youths rather, who would be brought into custody or into the jail, which happened occasionally.
I bet.
Youths who would get in trouble.
Youths, right.
Yeah, so she's one of those notable figures that's at Prairie Home.
Oh, she's at Prairie Home?
She is, okay. Yeah, yep.
I haven't stumbled across her literally, no, okay.
Yeah.
So the railroad came in and kind of pulled the fast one, like you say, and they built further south.
Yeah.
Pretty much to where we are now.
Yep.
All right.
Not more than a couple blocks from where we are now, really. And as the railroad started to develop and the town started to grow around it, it did become a bit of a wicked city.
I like how you put that.
Yeah.
That sounds much better than shady.
Yes.
Wicked.
If you think of Deadwood, South Dakota, where all of the Wild West figures are, Moorhead really wasn't that much different in a lot of ways. It was a tent town for a while until they started to build permanent structures. And there were saloons and lots of wild activities happened at those saloons.
Was there a difference between North Dakota and Minnesota, one dry, one not?
Yes. Yep. So North Dakota was dry.
In theory, right?
In theory, yeah. So everyone came across the bridges to Moorhead. Yeah. That really started in the later 1800s. It's all relatives. It's all the late 1800s, but up into about 1915. In 1900, there were, I think it was 47 saloons in Moorhead to around 3,000 residents.
And still no Dairy Queen.
Still no Dairy Queen.
I'm putting my plug in for you.
Yeah.
Okay. So that many saloons and only that many people.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. And early on, wild activities happened. So in 1870s, there was a shootout between two, I was about to say gentlemen, but I don't know if you'd call them gentlemen. Men. Who were Wild West figures, Shang, whose name was actually Charlie Stanton, and then Shumway, and they got in a shootout with each other. Innocent bystander was shot and killed, and then one of them died of their injuries. And that's what formed the government of Clay County, that shootout, because they realized they needed someone to be able to arrest the killer, people who were killing.
Up until this point, it was just like, whatever goes, whatever happens, happens, and try not to get out of hand?
Yeah, exactly, yeah. So Comstock, again, was brought in to start that government.
Huh. It goes back to the railroad too, but I know there are still some of the concrete pilings, you know, from the early bridges, and it's not really relevant to what we're talking about today, but there are still, amazingly, a lot of that same stuff, you know, around.
Oh, yeah.
To this present day that we drive by and we just see it and go like, oh, it's a big chunk of concrete. I wonder what that is.
Yeah. Yep. And it does kind of map out what the town used to look like, which is really interesting, especially in Moorhead, where the town looks hardly anything like it did in the 1870s.
I also noticed, and we have to be not careful about what we say, but I read about, one of the first people buried at Prairie Home was a lady that was killed somewhere, and where maybe pleasantly describe some of that or comment on that.
Yeah, so her name was Frances Merritt, and she was killed in 1876, I want to say, if I remember right. And she was shot by a man who some say was a old lover who had some jealousy. She was apparently married at the time. It was not her husband that shot her. It was someone else, and he did escape. He was arrested, but he escaped. She was supposedly shot in a house of ill repute, prostitution home, and we don't know what role she played. If she was, it could have also been a hotel that also had the House of Ill Repute.
A side business.
Yeah,
right.
Yep. So she could have been there. There's a lot we don't know about that story, but it is one of the interesting people that's there for sure.
Are you able to tell me much about, and I don't want to put you on the spot, but William Thornton?
Oh, William Thornton Montgomery.
Yeah. He was described in what I read as the greatest colored farmer of the Northwest. And he came here from Ohio or Indiana or somewhere. But tell me, because I saw a photograph of him, and to be up here as an African-American black person trying to farm, I know he left where he was from just because he didn't see much opportunity there, and he came up here. But that had to have been just incredible to try to start up here as a colored farmer, as it said. Yeah.
And he wasn't the only one. There was a pretty good community in Moorhead of African-American people. And so he, I believe, started in Lithia, North Dakota, which is no longer a place. Cool name, Lithia. Yeah, cool. And then came here. And I unfortunately don't know a lot about William Thornton Montgomery, but we did focus on him in our Black History, Stories of Black History exhibit. That was a little before I started. But another Civil War vet that was in Moorhead, Felix Battles, who has a statue by MSUM now.
Okay.
He was African-American and had come up here and lived most of the rest of his life here, and he was a barber. And that was a common trade for African-American men who came up here. And then the Adams family was another family in the area. Not that Adams
Right.
family.
I'm sorry. Sorry, jumped to conclusion. I knew it wasn't, but
It's the immediate thought. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Share with me a little bit about some of these steamboats or boating on the Red River, because obviously now as we drive by it, you think and obviously it's a seasonal thing, but I've rented a canoe once, and I remember going north from the Yemkomst area, and I paddled. Doesn't matter. I think it was upstream. Because I wanted to coast home.
Yeah,
and I
of course.
paddled for like 2 hours. And then I kind of looked up over the bank, and I thought, I've only gone as far as I could throw a rock.
Yeah,
The river just winds so much.
So much.
Yeah, but tell me a little bit about the boat travel and things if you have time.
Well, it was a pretty important form of transportation in the early days of Moorhead. They ran from here to Winnipeg and then down to St. Paul as well. Or not St. Paul, sorry. Winnipeg. And back and forth. And then... that was really tied in with the railroad, too. Some of the people who brought steamboats were instrumental in bringing the railroad. James J. Hill, he operated a Red River Steamboat company that eventually brought railroads as well. They would dredge the river, for one thing, to make it a little easier to get through. If you've ever gotten out of a canoe in the Red River, you know that you... sink into mud and muck.
Thankfully, I haven't.
Good. Don't do it.
But the steamboats is the right term. Displaced. I mean, they only went down like about 2 or 3 feet in the water, didn't they?
It's not a deep boat. Yeah. But they hauled massive amounts of material and people. I think there were 5 steamboats that operated during the heyday. The Anson Northrop was one of the big ones. And that ran to Winnipeg and back. That was the major transportation for the Hudson's Bay Company.
My question, how long did it take the average trip to go from Moorhead to Winnipeg?
That's a great question. And sadly, I don't know the answer to that.
All right. If anybody listening knows, call in.
Yes.
It's okay, but we're not live. I would have to think it had to a week or more. It's just, my goodness.
It wasn't fast, I'm certain. Yeah.
Right. So, and they're obviously the only river transportation now is people fishing, and because everything is kind of put that out of use, if you want to say it that way. So continuing on with Moorhead, we'll eventually get to the Dairy Queen, but you can tell where I'm going after this. What else of interest in Moorhead do you think we should know, or the Clay County area, whether it's Cragness or Rusted or Comstock? I mean, just the town of Comstock. Anything of really of interest you think people may want to hear? Yeah,
I mean, I always say that local history is the interesting history, and you can get really into the deep, nitty-gritty, weird stuff. So that's why I like it.
Okay. We're open to some of that. So
one interesting group, I mentioned the Thortvets a little bit. They were Norwegian settlers that came and settled along the Buffalo River. They were a family they were from West Telemark in Norway, and they came over in the 1860s. They initially went to Houston County in southern Minnesota. Not Houston, Texas.
Right.
That would be a big change. You never know. And they came here for farming and land, and they were among those early settlers that we have a lot of good records from. Orabelle Thortvet was the granddaughter of the original settlers, and she was an artist and historian, and she's one of my favorite figures in Clay County history because she really, really intensely documented the history of Clay County.
My brother, who lives down in Northfield area, participated in a cemetery tour where people took on the characters of people buried in this specific grave. Is there anything like that happens here in our area, or has, or?
We've talked about it.
Okay, just curious.
When it was talked about, it didn't happen, and I'm not sure why.
Sure. You'd have to know your stuff.
Yes, but I think it would be great fun.
Oh, yeah. If you presume to be Solomon Comstock, you can't just say, that's my house over there. You got to know a bit more than that.
Yep. And, Yeah.
So somebody could also be the lady that was shot in the House of Ill Repute.
Yep. Yes.
Any volunteers for that one? No, it would be fascinating. But he shared some pictures and some stories about that. It would be fun.
Yeah.
It would be fun,
Did they have people dress up in their period
I
costumes?
believe they did. That they did.
Yeah.
It's crossed my mind. But anything about the other surrounding areas of interest? Obviously, the railroad was a big part of people coming in here. But yet, eventually, people headed south, like I say, to Rusted, to Comstock, further Wolverton, agricultural.
Actually, getting down by Comstock was some of the earliest settlement, right along with Georgetown. Holy Cross Township, which is just kind of south of town, south of Kurtz Township, which is kind of Moorhead now. You'll have to look at a map.
I am now.
That was the site of a mission back in the 1860s, 1870s, and that was Métis settlement. So, that goes back far. There was a Swedish immigrant, Lars Bernhardsson, that settled right on the river there. His house was right on the river, cabin. And a lot of those areas now are going to be changed by the diversion that's coming through. But there's a lot of really old properties there that go back. So we do tend to focus on, we forget about the other surrounding areas, but they have a lot of that old history as well.
That they do.
Comstock, of course, has their historic school building. That is an old school, abandoned now.
Where's that at?
It's right by their community center, so it'd be off 75 a little bit.
Okay.
It's one of those really big structures, sort of like Park Christian School, just by Woodlawn. Privately owned now, I believe.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, let's move on to something a little more contemporary, and we can always come back. But you also, where did my notes go? You also manage, if that's the right word. I'll call it the Viking ship.
Yes.
There at the Jomkomst. I've been to the Stav Church,
of course, and
no smoking allowed in there.
Right. It'll go up pretty fast.
That it would. Obviously the Comstock House, and then the Bergquist Cabin.
Yeah.
Is that right over by what I would call the old zoo, or bear pen or something?
Well, it's sort of across a river bend from that.
Okay.
So it's more in North Moorhead. I'm blanking on the address right now, but more by the courthouse area if you go back behind that. And that's one of those early settler cabins that was John Bergquist lived there. He was around the same time as Job Smith, so they were contemporaries in the area.
Contemporaries for that age. Well, most of the people in our area are pretty familiar with the Jomkomst. The boat.
Yes.
But
if you grew up here and went to 4th grade, you probably came to view the Jomkomst.
Did that sail in about don't tell me, 78 or 9?
Close, 82.
82, okay.
Yep.
For some reason, I remember when I was in college out in Oregon, which was the late 70s, 80, in that area, maybe it made headlines somehow.
They were Bob Asp, who built the Jomkomst. He was building it still at that point. And then he would have done a practice sail probably 81, 80. So you probably heard about that.
That could have been.
It was on Lake Superior, so it was still a big deal.
I mean, as often as I've been over there, which isn't real often, but I've been there on occasion, I still find it just amazing to go look at that ship and to go on the high rise or look down into it. And as I've come to know a couple of the guys that have actually sailed on that ship, it's just incredible to even think about that.
Oh, absolutely.
But that was his dream, as it stated too.
It's miraculous they survived. I think.
It really is. And it's miraculous they built it in Holly.
Yes, in a potato warehouse that they had to tear down just to get it out.
They must have known it was going to come down.
Yep.
Otherwise, how do we get this out of here? I don't know. I thought you thought about that.
Yeah.
But Comstock House, that's where Solomon lived, and so a lot of this period things are in there too. The stuff, as you like to collect, is all there.
Yes, the stuff. Yep. We've got a lot of his law books and the furniture that the family had. The house is actually owned by the Minnesota Historical Society,
Okay.
and then we manage it.
Okay.
And they've had it for about, 40 years now, probably. And you can go on tours of it during the summer and learn all about the Comstock family.
So what's the history of the Stav Church? Is it the Hopperstead Stav Church?
Hopperstead
Obviously,
Stav
it was
Church.
built here, or did it be brought here?
It was built here.
Okay.
Guy Paulson built the Stav Church
really?
here. Yep.
Did not know that.
Yeah. So he was very passionate about Norwegian heritage, obviously.
Yeah.
He was already a woodcarver. He'd been doing that for quite a long time.
Okay.
And he wanted to kind of put those two interests together. So he built it in the 90s. A lot of it was built in his garage, actually. Not the structure
Not a
itself, of
potato farm.
course.
Okay.
But and then they built it on site
Yeah.
at the Hjemkomst.
Interesting.
Yeah.
A lot of weddings happen there, I know.
A lot of
Sometimes
weddings.
too.
Yep. Yeah.
Well, I'm kind of, I don't really have an awful lot of other questions or something. You've done a great job, so to speak, of kind of explaining a little bit, but you've got a lot of notes there. Is there something there that's on there like, hey, you forgot to ask about this. I want to talk about this.
Boy, I don't know.
Do I want to talk about volunteers necessary, or the society itself, or...
We could talk a little bit about who else is at Prairie Home, because that's,
Sure,
that's
absolutely.
something I think is interesting.
Absolutely, yeah.
And
Please.
a plug for the archives is that we do have really good records
Mm-hmm.
of cemeteries put together by the Red River Genealogical Society.
Okay.
So we've got just about every cemetery in Moorhead. We've got pretty good records. And what we can't find, we usually come to you guys and ask about, because
Or just
you
make
have
it
them
up.
too. Yeah. Yep. Big part of history.
Who's going to know?
But, some of the names we've talked about, the Propsfield family
Mm-hmm.
there at Prairie Home, the Comstocks, all of them are there. And then E.C. Sprague is another interesting one. We are not here at Corsmo. We're not quite in the Sprague edition, but if you go just a block or two south, we're in the Sprague edition, which is all of the neighborhoods, and they're named for E.C. Sprague, who was an early settler in the area.
Okay.
And then if you're familiar with the Ole Flayton, photographer from the early days of Moorhead.
Heard the name
Oh, yeah,
frequently,
yeah. Any old photo you've seen of Moorhead is either him or a guy named Haynes.
Okay.
But he's there, his family's there. So, we're talking about that walking tour. We could have a very interesting who's who of Moorhead history and Clay County history.
You could put me down for a character if it ever
Okay.
comes up.
All right. You want to be Solomon Comstock?
Does he have a beard?
He does.
Okay.
Yeah.
I can buy one somewhere
There we go.
at the Spirit Halloween
He doesn't
shop.
have a big beard.
Okay.
Yours might.
It's close.
Might work, yeah.
All right. Well, so who else you got at the cemetery there for us?
Mention more suffragists. May Burnham is a suffragette who's there. She went to Washington, D.C. and picketed outside the White House while Wilson was president.
Okay.
You can see a picture of her picketing there. Her family was early settlers in Moorhead, businessmen and Clay County government officials, and they're all there as well. Lots of families. It's not usually just one person in the family who's at Prairie Home. It's the whole family.
Yeah.
And as I started researching, I was like, if you're buried there now, does your family have to have bought that plot back in the 1870s? And for some families, that is the case. It's old families, the Wright family, Wright Funeral Home, they're there. They've been there.
We have a lot
Long
of
time.
families that come through Corsmo that they love Prairie Home and they want to know, are there any spaces left? And yes, there are. Not a lot, but
a lot.
We'll find them somewhere. They started using some aisles, as I will call them,
Okay.
too. So there's definitely room there. But you cannot have an interview and not talk about Garrison Keeler, of course.
Of course. Yeah. How could we forget that? Yeah.
Right. Obviously, the name of his program, Prairie Home Companion, we've all heard about. And he was in town doing a presentation or show somewhere,
Yeah. Yep.
and he was walking by us and saw, hey, great name.
Yeah.
Am I close?
Yeah, he was at, I think it was MSUM doing a presentation show, as you said, and was out for a walk and saw Prairie Home Cemetery. Didn't think he could have the word cemetery in a name for a radio show.
Could be a little downer.
I'm not sure. it would have to be
Prairie
pretty
Home
cemetery. Yeah.
Yeah.
And according to lore, he had some good friends that he was on the trip with, and he thought companions, and so he added Prairie Home Companion. And of course, he did a lot of stuff at Concordia, so he was often back here, right near Prairie Home, and so I imagine it's something he was pretty connected to.
One other tidbit I read about was the traffic that used to go through Prairie Home, probably before all the fences and things, but people would, like maybe at Concordia, I can't remember exactly what it was, but a lot of people walked through there or rested there, or because it was a convenient pathway.
Oh, yeah. I have oral histories where people talk about growing up in Moorhead and walking through it to get to school, as kids even, or I think one kid talked about sliding in the winter there, and I think there was a bit more of an incline into Concordia at the time. And so they talked about that. An interesting place. But, cemeteries used to be more of a gathering spot. In the Victorian era, it was a beautiful place to go and see your deceased relatives and gather.
We viewed them a lot differently than we do now. Now they're just, just got to have them. But I guess... what else you have for us? Anything else?
I don't have much else. Do you
talk about the founding of Dairy Queen? the Litholans were good people, and now Troy and his wife. That in itself has got a lot of history. Well, okay, we're on it. I brought it up. We were talking the other day about the Dairy Queen here in town, how it was grandfathered in so they can do... Do you know some of that story?
I know that they can do kind of... I won't say whatever they want, but they don't have to follow.
They got a lot of pull.
Yeah, yep. They can serve some of those dishes that you can't get at any other Dairy Queen. Yeah. Even barbecues, you can't get those at every Dairy Queen.
Thankfully.
Yeah, gosh. Now I want Dairy Queen.
There we go. Well, it's 2:45. They're still open.
Yeah.
And it's a great place and always busy. And but no, if you were to any type of social media. People find out you're from Moorhead, or if they were from Moorhead, but they now live in Chattanooga, Tennessee. Is the Dairy Queen still open?
Oh yeah,
absolutely. And there's still a quarter mile long line.
Yeah, practically to the railroad tracks every day.
So we put the plug in for Dairy Queen. We're heading over there.
Yes.
But I can't think of anything else, Petra. Am I forgetting anything? We just move on. So, all right.
Yeah.
Well, I do appreciate your time. And again, today, if you're just joining us and you can't rewind, we're talking with Petra Gunderson-Leith from the Historical and Cultural Society of Clay County. They got a fantastic facility over there on First Avenue. Is it First Avenue North? The Viking ship is there. They've got exhibits that rotate about every 6 months.
Yep, every 6 months, every 2 years for the bigger ones. We just put up a new one.
We went over, my wife and I went over about 6 months ago. It was linens or something. I mean, there were aprons on the wall. There were costumes and just amazing things. I almost got a nap in, but my wife was enthralled.
Well, that's good. Can't make everyone happy.
No, you can't. They can't. But there's always exhibits rotating over there. So take your time and stop on over and visit and go on in. It's a wonderful facility there. The ship is there. So thank you, Petra, for being our guest today. And for all you folks out there, thank you for your time today. And enjoy your day. We're recording here in the middle of March, and the temperatures are in the 50s. You can't get a podcast in without talking about the weather. So enjoy your day, everybody. Take care. You have been listening to More Than a Funeral, Voices of the Red River Valley. And I have been your host, Tom Pence, and I'm one of the funeral directors at Corsmo Funeral and Cremation Service here in Moorhead, Minnesota. The word service has been an intentional part of our name for over 66 years, and we pride ourselves on attention to detail and personal service. Personally, my responsibilities revolve around the advanced planning aspect of our profession, and I enjoy visiting with people as we discuss the many possibilities of a memorable celebration service that will eventually honor a life according to their wishes. And from a practical standpoint, which is getting so very important these days, I help families plan ahead so that the family left behind will not be burdened with a large financial responsibility, therefore allowing them to spend time with their family, remembering their loved one, not having to worry about how to handle the expenses. Asset protection is also a very real issue these days, as many care facilities can cost several $1,000s a month, depending upon the level of care. Corsmo can provide simple and effective ways of protecting those assets, and I welcome the opportunity to visit with you about that. If you enjoyed this podcast and found some value in it, we greatly appreciate your sharing with a friend. And if you have a moment, text somebody right now. Encourage them to give a listen and perhaps follow the podcast personally. We anticipate publishing a new episode on the first day of each month, so check back for interesting guests and topics. And of course, we also welcome your suggestions for future guests and topics of interest as well. So thank you for listening. If you want more information and actually want some free estimates or just have questions, contact any of the directors at Corsmo Funeral and Cremation Service. Our phone number is 218-233-1533, and our web address is corsmofuneralservice.com. Thanks again for listening, and from all of us at Corsmo, have a great day.